Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel where we talk about Hungarian true crime stories, and my name is Tímea. Now, before we do anything, today's case is gonna be very brutal. It involves kidnapping, rape, and brutal murder. So if this is not your kind of thing, I recommend you don't watch this video. Other than that, I also wanted to ask you to comment anything about yourself in the comment section. Which country you are from, how old you are, what's your nickname, what's your favorite color. Anything about yourself that you want to share, because my YouTube analytics are not very good and I don't have any information on my viewers. Also, this case is not a communist crime episode but a current case episode, and that's because the killer is still alive and he is eligible for parole soon, but we are gonna talk about it just in a second. A man called Balog Lajos was born in 1966 in the city of Százhalombatta. He was one of 4 brothers, but by the time of the crimes, he was in contact with only one of them. He had an incapable and irresponsible mother, but I don't know much about her. And he also had a very abusive, terrible, alcoholic father who was abusive in every single way, mentally, emotionally, and physically. He came from a very toxic and traumatizing childhood, and in his later interviews, he's always said that he knew that this is what led to who he became, but he doesn't want to hide behind his labels to justify his crimes. He was described as very intelligent, intellectual, and very performance-oriented, as well as very strict and stern. When he grew up and he became a father and a husband, he was very demanding to the outside world. He expected everybody to be the way that he imagines them, and he could not process temporary grievances. He could not process if something didn't go the way he wanted, and as a response, he was emotionally abusive himself. He's unable to forget or forgive, and he was always searching revenge whenever somebody wronged him in any way, whether true or just perceived. And later on in his crimes, he always went for the weak ones who were not able to defend themselves, and he could easily overpower them. His first record of violence was when he was 8 years old and his nephew was 4 years old. And for no particular reason, he just started beating up this little 4-year-old toddler until this baby almost died, but luckily he didn't. Lajos could never give a reasonable explanation to why he did these kind of things. He just said that something dark overcame him and he was unable to deal with this charge of violence in him. When he was 21 years old, he married his wife on the 8th of July, 1957. And only a couple of years into their marriage, he was caught and sentenced for attempted robbery and theft. And he was supposed to serve 2.5 years, which he began serving in 1994. However, he was let out early, and this prison sentence did not do any good for him. He only came out even more violent and dark than before. And now his personality really turned into the extremes. If anybody did anything that he slightly disliked, cruel punishment came to those. And unfortunately, this sudden change in his already terrible character led to his first murder. He had a sister-in-law, a 16-year-old girl, and Lajos always considered her as very rude and disrespectful and ungrateful to her parents. And of course, him not liking when somebody doesn't fit his expectations of how people should behave, he became incredibly resentful towards her. And one day, when she talked back to her father in a disrespectful way, like she responded something rude, he decided that he was going to kill her very soon. It just so happened that on the 4th of May 1994, Lajos was helping out her brother-in-law, the brother of her sister-in-law, obviously. And that was when Lajos learned that this girl was searching for any kind of excuse to skip class and she was avoiding school at all cost. And this obviously didn't fit Lajos's expectations towards her. Like, how dare she be ungrateful that she should be attending school diligently, and she was already so disrespectful and rude to everybody anyway. So he called her and told her that if she wanted to skip school the next day, on the 5th of May, he would be very happy to hang out with her. And this is exactly what she did. So on the 5th of May, the next day, she arrived at the bus station in Százhalombatta because she normally lived and went to school in the city of Érd. So Lajos was already waiting for her at 8:30 a.m. in the bus stop, and despite the overcast and rainy weather that day, he was able to convince her to hang out in the nearby small forest in Százhalombatta. And unfortunately, that was going to be a trap, as you can imagine. Little did she know that Lajos had some rags, a belt, and a very long pair of scissors that's used for cutting wallpaper, because that was his job, his profession. He painted houses. Suddenly he started strangling her with his bare hands and then slapped her across the face multiple times. When she was knocked onto the floor, he stripped her naked and forced her to a nearby sand mine. There he tied the belt around her neck and laid her onto the ground, facing down, kneeled on her back and started strangling her with the belt like that. At some point, he even fed her grass. I think he even raped her, but I cannot be completely sure about that. But then he took out the pair of scissors and stabbed her in the genitals, in the abdomen, in the navel, and at last in her neck. When he checked her pulse and she was still alive, in the end he strangled her to death. In a later interview, he said this about this murder. "When I killed my sister-in-law, I enjoyed it properly, which is why I dragged it on for hours. She almost died several times, but I always revived her to continue. It was enjoyable. I did that like 3 or 4 times. At first, I was probably more afraid than her, but during the murder, I properly enjoyed it. When she died, I was sorry. I was sorry that it was over. I did not regret." After her murder, her mother obviously became frantic and she reported her to the police as a missing person. And when Lajos supposedly first heard about her going missing, he was so helpful to her poor, afraid, panicking, grieving mother, and he offered his help. What the fuck is wrong with these murderers? Why do they enjoy acting innocent and trying to help the people whose family members they have murdered brutally? What the fuck is wrong with this motherfucker? Jesus Christ. And because the police didn't suspect him of anything and it looked like he would never be caught for this murder, he felt invincible and better than anyone else, even more than before. And because he was such a bragging and proud type, he was unable to keep this secret to himself. So he decided to tell it to somebody. And that was going to be his little brother, Balog Tibor. Now, I told you before that he had 3 brothers, but he only kept in touch with this one, Tibor. And when Lajos told Tibor what he did to this little girl, his sister-in-law, his relative, Tibor thought it was cool because he looked up to Lajos his whole life. It was his older brother, he was so cool and he just wanted to be like him. When he heard that Lajos was a motherfucking murderer, he wanted to be like him. And Lajos then came up with the plan to make up his own little gang. And he wanted to involve 2 people. Tibor, his little brother, and their mutual friend, a man called Christian. Their entry ticket to this gang would be murdering someone, anyone. Lajos said it could be their friends, family, a stranger, he didn't care, but both of them had to kill a person in his presence to prove their unconditional love and loyalty, and it would prove to Lajos that Tibor and Christian accept him as the leader of the gang. First, it was Christian's turn to prove his loyalty to Lajos with a murder, and his chosen victim was his 14-year-old ex-girlfriend. He coaxed his ex-girlfriend to the same forest where the previous murder occurred, and he came up with this lie that he, Christian, Tibor and Lajos, so the 3 men, were going to shoot with air rifles and it would be a fun activity, and she, as a lone 14-year-old girl, should come along with these 3 adult men. Unfortunately, this little girl was too innocent and too naive and she went with them. When they arrived at the chosen spot in this clearing in the forest, Lajos signaled for murder, but Christian was just not able to do it. He could not bring himself to attack and kill his ex-girlfriend. He chickened out, as he should have. Neither Christian nor Tibor were actually willing to do anything. They realized how fucked up it was, and it only sounded cool when they were talking about this, not when they were actually supposed to commit a murder. So Lajos, this man, twice her age and probably twice her size, knocked her onto the floor and stripped her naked. At this point, both Christian and Tibor were trying to stop him, but they either did not have the power to overpower him or the courage to stand up against him, and Lajos had already decided on the outcome of that day, and there was no turning back. Lajos sent his brother away, Tibor, to just go home, and then Lajos forced the girl and Christian to the nearby SANDMINE. There, while Christian was forced to watch and wait, Lajos raped this little girl. And at the end, Lajos instructed Christian to go ahead with the murder and kill this girl, because this was his victim and this was his entry ticket to the gang. But Christian still could not be persuaded. He just did not do it. He was not gonna bring himself to murder this girl. So in the end, Lajos stabbed her in the stomach with the same knife that he cut off her clothes with. And while this girl was alive and conscious, laying on the ground, Lajos collected heavy pieces of asphalt and concrete and hit her in the head until she died. However, the police and the families of the victims still did not know anything about these murders. These girls just were reported as missing, and the police was not ordering a murder investigation. The bodies were conceived very well in the SANDMINE, and probably nobody would have found them until Lajos eventually unveiled himself, but that's a little bit further into the story. Of course, after this murder, Lajos became incredibly angry with Tibor and Christian because he felt cheated and betrayed, and they were supposed to prove their unconditional love and loyalty to him with this murder, and they just chickened out. He called them cowards and useless pieces of shit, and he just yelled at them for hours until he let his rage out. But interestingly, the gang wasn't disbanded. Despite not completing this entry ticket murder, he did not kick them out of the gang. I suppose he probably had too much to lose, because if these two men were to report him to the police, then obviously that would not be good for him. So I suppose he kept them in the gang somehow, either forcefully or coerced them, convinced them somehow, I'm not sure. Sometime after this, Lajos decided to separate from her wife and his daughter. They sold their apartment together, and her wife and daughter moved back to their hometown of Érd, and Lajos stayed in Százhalombatta. Lajos said that the reason to this separation was that he had sudden urges to hurt and kill his wife and his kid too, and obviously he loved them too much. He didn't want this to ever happen. In an interview, he said, "I had to leave my wife and my 5.5-year-old so that they wouldn't become my victims one day. If compulsion comes, there is no escape. As I lay next to my wife in the evening, often when she fell asleep and I watched TV, I just couldn't get the thought out of my head that I could kill them too. I imagined strangling her so many times. I just couldn't stop thinking about it. Then I started fantasizing about chopping her body up in the bathtub, putting it in bags, and so on." Now remember that Lajos' wife's family is still missing for their missing 16-year-old, the first victim of Lajos. And Lajos figured that they could raise some money to upkeep his little gang, and he thought that the best way to do that was to anonymously blackmail his parents-in-law. So he called them on the phone, having changed his voice a little bit, and demanded ransom money for their missing daughter, who they did not know was actually murdered for a while now. He demanded 500,000 forints, which is a lot in 1994, and the parents were supposed to put this money inside a bag and then throw it out of the window of a moving train at a specific tree that would be marked for them to clearly see. and then he would go and collect the money at this tree. However, the parents obviously did not comply with this ransom and blackmail. In fact, they reported it to the police. And the police got hold of the voice sample of the phone call and they started comparing it to some other people. And it came back as an 85% match to Lajos's voice, because he had changed his voice somewhat, but he was not able to change it that very well. Now, obviously, a voice match is not going to be eligible on court. It doesn't serve as good enough evidence, especially if it's not 100%, but it was enough for the police to start suspecting him. If Lajos didn't come up with this stupid idea of blackmailing the family, he probably would not have been caught, ever. So the police called him in for a questioning, and while they interrogated him, he acted very arrogant, but also very nervous, which was a dead giveaway that he knew something. The police let him go after the questioning, when he immediately went back to the SANDMINE where the two bodies were hidden, and he brought some denatured alcohol and hydrochloric acid to try to destroy the remains. Now, hydrochloric acid, I can understand that it would degrade the body, but the denatured alcohol, I'm not sure about that, why he thought that this would get rid of the remains, or maybe he just wanted to get rid of the DNA, I'm not sure. He also acquired a pistol illegally, and he planned on robbing a shop which was located on the ground floor of an apartment building on the 23rd of January 1995. However, when he got to this location, he saw that there were too many customers inside the shop and it would be just too risky and too complicated and he could be overpowered. So he ditched his plan. However, he was still in the spirit of committing some crime, so right after this attempted robbery, he called his gang together and they went to their favorite little spot in this forest near the SANDMINE. And there, these three men, Christian, Tibor and Lajos, hatched up new plans on the murders and robberies they wanted to commit together. However, their little meeting as a gang was interrupted. There were two 19-year-old teenage girls jogging in the forest. They were on a regular evening exercise, and unfortunately, they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And this is exactly how Lajos worded it in a later interview as well. And while these two girls were jogging in the forest, Lajos snuck up behind them and he hit one of the girls in the back of the head with his pistol, knocking her onto the ground, while Christian overpowered the other girl. These two men robbed the two girls from their valuables, like their jewelry. Then they forced them to the area of the SANDMINE. While Tibor and Christian were waiting nearby, Lajos raped both of the girls. Then, after he was finished raping them, he instructed Tibor to kneel on one of the girls' back while Lajos would kneel on the other girl's back. And they shot them both in the head from only about 20 centimeters. And the crazy part is that both of these girls survived such a blow into the head from close range. So then Lajos was still not satisfied with himself, and he took out a 22 centimeter long blade that he brought with himself and started stabbing both of the girls countless times everywhere. And then Lajos checked again, and both of these girls still had a pulse. They were still alive. After being raped, beaten, shot in the head, and stabbed, they were still alive. So then Lajos, with the help of his brother Tibor, beat and strangled both of these girls to death. 2 days after the double murder, on the 25th of January 1995, the police called Lajos back in for another interview regarding the disappearance of the 16-year-old sister-in-law. The police had a very good reason to suspect Lajos of the blackmailing because of the voice sample, so they had enough evidence against him to detain him and handcuff him at least. And they ordered a polygraph test. And before a polygraph test, there is an interview with a forensic psychologist who evaluates the suspect. And this polygraph test would never actually even take place because during this interview with the psychologist, Lajos confessed to everything that he had ever done. He told them everything that he did to the 16-year-old sister-in-law. Then he talked about the attempted robbery in the shop. He talked about the murder of Christian's ex-girlfriend and the murder of these two teenage girls who were just jogging in the forest unsuspectingly. All of these three men went on trial and they got their sentences quite fast, though I cannot tell you exact dates. I'm not sure how fast the trial ended. But Lajos got life in prison because the death penalty no longer exists in Hungary. But in the 90s, a life sentence only meant 25 years. And even though now a life sentence is a life sentence, because he was convicted in 1995, he was eligible to get out in 2020. The reason why he did not get out in 2020 was because he got into a fight in prison which added 5 years to his sentence. So he is eligible for parole in 2025. Now, as much as I know in current law, he would have to apply and be evaluated if he is actually allowed to be out of prison. And I really hope and pray that he does not get out in 4 years from now. Because if he sees this video, he's gonna come and kill me too. Oh my god, let's not jinx it. His brother Tibor got 13 years and Christian got 8 years for complicity, so they are both out of prison for a while now. During the proceedings and the first half of his prison sentence, Lajos was actually very proud of himself. He wasn't regretful at all. He loved murdering people and he loved talking about how much he enjoyed torturing and mutilating and brutally murdering young girls. He said that he will always hate women because women ruined his life. I guess because he hated his mother. Lajos also admitted to 2 more murders of his former accomplice in crime, so he probably even had another gang going on before this one, and an acquaintance, but the police never found their bodies or their identities. In the early 2000s, when he was much younger, so just a few years into his prison sentence, he gave an interview to the media, which I'm going to link into the description, but obviously it's all in Hungarian. But you can probably read his body language if you want. He said that if he was ever gonna be let out of prison, he has full intention of going back to his previous life, and he just wanted to kill people. That was his hobby. He literally said to the interviewer that after I'm free, I will commit murders so brutal and disgusting that the world has never seen. I will select the most disgusting ways to kill. You will not catch me just shooting someone in the head from far away. That is not outrageous enough. However, in an interview from last year when he was already older and I hope wiser, he gave another interview, which I'm also linking in the description, where he said, I was a spiritual and moral wreck 25 years ago. I didn't appreciate things in life. Life was not the most important thing in my life, whether mine or anyone else's. I went through torture as a child, so I know what it was like for my victims too. I saw it on their faces. And he also said, I hate myself. I can't comprehend how I could do what I did. I do not apologize though, and not because I do not regret what I did. And also not because I cannot turn back the wheel of time and give the families their relatives, but because what I did cannot be forgiven. I also wouldn't forgive if somebody murdered my child. And in this same interview, he also talked about murdering his father. In the beginning of the video, you may remember that I mentioned that he had a very abusive father. He was abusive in every possible way. And he turned Lajos's childhood into torture. However, I did not tell you that Lajos's father went missing in the 90s and he was allegedly murdered, for which Lajos's mother was convicted and served a prison sentence. He said, and this is crazy, that the reason to murdering his father was that in 1990, after the family Christmas party, Lajos's toddler little daughter ran to Lajos's father, so the daughter's grandpa, and she was looking up to him, wanting to hug him and kiss him goodbye because they were on the way home. And Lajos's father picked Lajos's baby girl up in his arms and spat into this baby girl's face, saying, "Get this little fucker out of my sight or I kill her." And if somebody did that to my daughter, especially if my own father did that, girl, don't even get me started. Lajos witnessed this, but during this whole time, Lajos's wife was in another room dressing up, getting ready to leave. And when she was yelling outside, "Hey, what's wrong? Why is our daughter crying? What happened?" Lajos said, "Don't worry, chillax, just go to the car. I let everybody out. I'm gonna stay back and talk with my dad for a second." When his wife and daughter went out the door to the car, Lajos locked the door, broke the key inside the lock, and then went on to murder his own father out of anger. I do not know who else knew about this murder, why his mother was convicted of this, or how long it took, or how he did it, because his wife and kid were waiting in the car, so it could not have taken that long. Or either way, I do not know anything about this. It was never proven in court. This is just what Lajos said on an interview last year, and there is probably no substantial evidence for it. But I can never justify murder of anyone. I do not see why killing somebody would be better than keeping them alive. But if I really had to choose one murder, but I would say, okay, I can understand, was this one. This father was supposedly incredibly abusive, an alcoholic, emotionally, physically, mentally abusive and manipulative, and ruined Lajos's entire childhood and ruined his wife's and his brother's childhood. And then went on and disrespect a little baby girl who just wanted to give him love and wanted to kiss him goodbye, and then picks up this baby girl and spits in her face, telling her to get out of his sight, otherwise he would kill her. I don't want to say, but I understand. I understand. That's it, I understand. You can disagree with me. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. And that is pretty much all I can tell you about this case. I do not know what happened to Lajos's wife, ex-wife, and kid. I do not know about Christian's or Tibor's life now that they are out of prison. And I do not know anything about the victims either, honestly. This is all that I could know, that I could gather, and maybe there is more information on the internet that I did not find. But I don't know. Check out the sources if you want to see some of the interviews with him. Anyways, do not forget to let me know whatever you think in the comment section. I actually really enjoy reading and responding to comments. It always makes my day to see that people actually care about my content. And if you have made it this far, you can liking is allowed, okay? And recommend it. And don't forget to share this video with one person that you think would enjoy my content. Subscribing is for free, and I have some more very interesting content coming your way. Thank you very much for watching, and I see you next time. Bye! And I just wanted to show you my dress. It's so pretty, right? I know. Casually cosplaying as a princess.